Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 41 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes. And with me is the man whose penmanship and writing ability astounds us all, Mr. Ken Kelly.
Oh, it's great to be here. It really is. But I'm using an illusion. I'm using a trick here, Rory, because we're going to be honest here. We record these up front. And at this present moment, as you're listening to this, as this goes live, I'm actually in Southern Africa in the Kruger National Park.
He is. We record this early because Ken's taken a well-earned vacation, well-earned break. And I'm here in sunny Manchester, looking at the wonderful rain and the Tupperware skies. Ken will be under African skies, and it sounds. I would love to see those African skies. I've seen them on the TV, but I guess nothing compares to the real thing, Ken, does it?
Oh, there's a beautiful song called African Sky Blue by a man called Johnny Clegg. Go and look on YouTube and have a listen. So we're going to be covering today in episode 41, kicking off with case studies. Is there a blueprint for writing a case study? We're asked again and again during our counselling studies to write them. Then we're going to be going into theory with Rory. And it's a complex one for some, this, Rory. You're going to be speaking about the 19 propositions. I almost want to do a dun, 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 19 propositions.
Yeah, and it's one where I've literally seen learners burst into tears because the 19 propositions looks literally impenetrable. It's coated in an intellectual suit of armour, and it's buried in a box round a moat, surrounded by people with guns. That's how difficult it is to get in, Ken. And I've managed to sneak in under the radar, through the wire, across the minefield. We're going to open that box, and I'm going to tell you, not perhaps about the propositions themselves, but an easier way of understanding what they're alluding to and they mean. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to give you a tip sheet. I'm going to give you 3 pieces of tips or 3 observations on how to use the 19 propositions in your assignments, which leads us nicely, doesn't it, Ken?
It does.
To our next segment.
And we're going to be ending episode 41, speaking about counselling skills. As students, we have to learn our counselling skills. And at the end of the day, when you're sat there in that room with the client and that door is closed, your theory sometimes can sit outside of that door. And it is you and them. In actual fact, 2 strangers sitting in a room if it's your very first meeting, and the road to a deep and meaningful relationship is paved by your counselling skills. So we're going to be doing a little bit of a deep dive into that. And perchance, Rory, because you mentioned the penmanship at the top of this episode, perchance touching on the fact that I have a book that is about to release in hard copy called Counselling Skills, A Student's Guide. But of course, we start at the beginning, and we're going to be looking at a case study. Now, case study, Rory, you and I, we have taught together, we worked together as counselling tutors for a number of years. And when you said case study to the learners, there was a look of dread on the faces.
Dread. It was only that matched by the 19 propositions, Ken. It was one of those you knew that you're going to get people dread and disconnected. And I want to share you a little funny story from my training. I didn't have any qualifications until I went back to college at 42 years old. And the intellectual world was, it was complete mystery to me. And I'm laughing just thinking about this story. My tutor said to me, what you've got to do is you've got to do a pen portrait of your client. And I was like, wrote this down, because it was all very earnest. And when all the students had left, I went up to her and I said, I can't draw. And she went, sorry, what do you mean? I said, I can't draw. I said, I'm not quite sure I can draw a picture of the client to any great degree. And she went, no. You know what a pen portrait is? I said, yeah, it's a picture you draw with your pen. And she went, no, what it is a picture you draw with words.
Yeah.
And many years later, I had a learner in tears who thought it was the same thing. She came in and she was crying. I said, whatever's the matter? And she said, I can't draw, Rory. And I said, let's sit down. I think what we need to do It's just me explain it to you what it is. I think probably I've not explained it properly. But yeah, a pen portrait, that's the start, I think, of doing a really good case study. So you start off a pen portrait with the client's details, their gender, their age. You don't have to go into great detail, but what you're doing with a case study is you're literally painting a story, picture in words. So you're giving the people who are writing it a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the beginning is, what is this client like? Who are they? So you've got a real idea. The person's market's got a real idea, and then you go on to say, what have they come for? And I think that's really important because that gives an indication for the rest of the case study how you're working with what they've come for.
100%. You've got that presenting issue right there at the front door. So you're giving a very clear indication, a picture in the mind of the person who will, I guess, be marking or assessing this case study of yours. And they can see this client. The client comes alive for them. They can almost see this the therapy room. They're almost there seeing this client. And, case studies are used all the time in business. A case study is basically just taking something and showing that it works by evidence. It, and that's all you're doing here. But in able to evidence it, you need to paint the picture first, to set the scene, to open the curtain, I guess, on the therapy room.
Absolutely. Now, it depends on your awarding body because there's criteria, the dreaded criteria, and that comes up time and time again. If you want to know more about criteria, if you go to our mother website, www.counsellingtutor.com, click on the right-hand side of the website that says Facebook, and we have a huge Facebook community, over 5,000 like-minded people who are interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And if you type in the search bar criteria, you will see lots of learners who have posted about how to hit criteria. Criteria really is answering the question. So that's when you hit the criteria, you've answered the question. And lots of different awarding bodies have different criteria. One might be, for instance, how did you work ethically and safety? How did you work with ethics? So you might be talking about confidentiality. You might be talking about making sure the client's closed down at the end of a session. So you're not sending the clients out in tears, that you're working to make sure that, they're not in a place where they're distressed or disconnected. Depending on your model, what stages did you work? So if you're using the 7 stages of processing person-centered therapy, you might allude to that. There's quite a lot, but you're trying to draw a picture of a journey where a client comes in and that journey that you've taken through therapy and what happens when they leave. So that is how you do it. And there's quite a few other things. How does counselling theory apply to this client? Does it help you? Well, a good one, if you're doing, say, CBT, is a client might come in and say, everybody hates me. Now, in CBT, that could be considered an irrational thought. So it might be about working about how do you get to that? Where's your thinking about that? And working with unhelpful thoughts or intrusive thoughts. It might be, if you're working in TA, that you find that every time you meet somebody or a certain type of person, you're catapulted back to being a child. So if you're doing a TA assignment, you might be talking about transference. Yeah?
Very much
that
so.
Type of, yeah. So there's plenty of scope for putting your theories into your case studies. What do you think that students struggle with the most when writing case studies, Ken?
I think it's the name case study itself is just really weighty. And I think breaking it down as you have there, Rory, all you're doing is you're painting a picture of who this person is coming in, what they presented with, how you worked with them. What did you do? What did you not do? And here you're hitting those criteria that Rory mentioned. So it's going to be according to your rewarding body. And it will be asked, when you're asked to do the case study, they're going to outline what they want from you. And then what were the results of that? What happened or did not happen as a result of the way that you were working together? And again, linking that back to the theory. And then maybe what would you have done differently if you could go back and do that again? What was your learning? What did you take away from that to evidence that you got something out of that and to paint that complete picture?
Yeah, absolutely. And also a therapeutic case study is nothing without comments of your own awareness. We're not doing psychological case studies where you're looking at the client as a research object. They're a living, breathing person that you're having a relationship with. And, the part of the commentary in case studies, I would imagine, with all awarding bodies, certainly the two that I've had dealings with in the past, ask you to make a comment on your own experience, how it felt, how you felt the client, so putting your own frame of reference in, appropriately into a case study. So it felt like the client, it felt by using congruence and unconditional positive regard, the client was able to open up and tell me more difficult material. That is one where you put your own self-awareness in and link it to theory and show and demonstrate how the client has moved on.
Love it. Absolutely love it. And if you want a great example of a case study that is not necessarily related to therapy, watch a program called Top Gear. It's made in the United Kingdom, and they talk about cars, and they will show you the car, and they'll tell you about the car, and they'll show you the inside of the car, and they will then drive the car, and they will explain how the torque is affecting the speed of the car, and how the suspension is helping them to corner, and how the fin is keeping it nice and stuck to the road. And they'll tell you what's really good about it, and then they'll say, but this also got some downsides to this car as well, and they'll tell you some downsides about it. And then afterwards, they might cut to a studio shot of three of them talking about the car and saying, well, I might buy that because of this and this and that reason. So Top Gear, there's where you go for your case studies.
Yeah, and if anybody writes it about using a stick shift or an automatic gearbox in the therapy room, I think you might not be passing that. So
hopefully that takes the fear of the case study away. Case studies are used all the time. You're surrounded by case studies. Usually if you're going to buy something and you look at kind of examples of the product you're buying, you're going to be seeing case studies that are presented in front of you. They're not really that scary. It's just decoding them, which I think you've done really well here today, Rory. And speaking about decoding, we're about to go into the thickest of theories for some of person-centered. It's Carl Rogers kind of developed the 19 propositions. And you're going to kind of hopefully decode that for us a bit today.
I'll give you a taste of it, Ken, with you in mind. You ready for this? Carl Rogers produced 19 perceptions or positions of the human condition, and they call them 19 propositions. And I'm going to read one, and I'm going to decode it in terms of Ken and where he is as this podcast is being broadcast. All individuals, organisms exist in a continually changing world of experience, the phenomenal field of which they are the centre. So as Ken stood in Kruger National Park, he is at the centre of his phenomenal field, his view of experience. And that changing world will be those beautiful skies, maybe the animals, and he will experience that differently to the person who is next to him, because that is his own experience. But he is in the centre of that experience. I'm a bit jealous, if I'm honest, Ken. And it will be a great experience, I would imagine, Ken. But that is Roger's first position. Ken will experience the world in his own way in Kruger National Park, and it will change consistently around him. There we go.
Without any further ado, it's Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees Oakes.
Everyone knows everything. This is not a theory of knowledge. It is you, I, we know everything about ourselves. There may be defences, denials, cover-ups, secrets, faults and overloads in memories, but we know we are the ultimate source. It's probably one of the most phenomenological statements ever written in a book on counselling and psychotherapy, and it was penned by the late John Schleen, who was a student of Carl Rogers, who went on to develop person-centred therapy after Rogers' death in 1987. And there's no better example of phenomenology in terms of person-centred theory than Carl Rogers' 19 propositions. The 19 propositions are in fact Carl Rogers' theory of personality in 19 statements of how someone perceives the world. That's what the 19 propositions are. 19 statements of how someone perceives their world. And the best way of applying that theory to assignments is, I think, by using examples of client statements they may have made through the counselling interaction. You can't really, I don't think, if you're doing a case study, really evidence the 19 propositions without actually putting a dialogue statement from the client. In other words, a quote from what the client said. And I think there's 3 good ways where you can maximise the use of 19 propositions in an assignment, and I'm going to go through those. So the first is you can use it to evidence how clients engage with their incongruent selves. So any statement from a client where they're talking about incongruence, in other words, how they want to be but how they are, is a rich area for you then to put a quote in from the client and then put a one of the 19 propositions in that matches what the client has said. And remember, in the 19 propositions, the word organism means person. Rogers wrote it in very coded, in a very coded way. So when Rogers talks about the organism, if you just put person in that, you'll find it makes a lot more sense. The second position is, I think, is to get really good marks in an assignment, is to describe how, when understanding their reality, clients can transcend it. Now, this is a really important position in phenomenology, and certainly in the philosopher Husserl. He believed that once we understood what the truth of our world was, from how we perceive it, then we can go on to alter it, transcend or alter our position. So you could have a quote from a client who talks about how they began to understood what their world is, the truth of maybe a relationship they've been in or a job they've been in, or how they perceive themselves through interjected values and conditions of worth, and how now they've transcended it, how they've altered it, how they've altered their lives. And again, it's really good to be able to put a quote in from the 19 propositions. And again, once you've swapped out the word organism for person, the propositions make a lot more sense. The third way of demonstrating Roger's idea is to demonstrate with examples how clients engage with their truth and what changes they make as a consequence of that. So what you can do is a client may write about how they're making changes, what they know now that they didn't when they first came. So it might be a client who's been in an abusive relationship, who has been told how to feel and has lost the capacity to take on their own feelings and their own thoughts and feelings. And as slowly the therapy starts to unwind and present itself, what happens is clients then regain their own emotional palette. They're able to access their own emotions, and then they make changes. And again, it's another area where you can get a direct quote from the clients about what they've done and how they've changed and put a proposition in.
Thank you, Rory. I like that you kind of gave a bit of a way of understanding how it relates and how it really works. I think you got under the hood of that. Is there a handout that people can grab on that one, Rory?
Yeah, there is. I'm going to do a handout, and it's just called 3 Positions in Phenomenology, the 19 Propositions. And effectively, I'm not going to go through the propositions because I think you need to apply them to your clients in case studies. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 3 positions of understanding them differently and how they're applied. So when you look at them, you think, so that's how they're applied. And those will be available as a download.
Well, you got to get that, and if you want to get it, it's so simple to do. Go to counsellingtutor.com, which is our mother website. Top menu bar, just select the podcast tab, go to podcast episode 41, and you can download it. It's right at the top. It's Rory's free handout. So, out of that thick theory into an area that is sometimes frustration area for some learners, not all learners, but for some learners. And this is counselling skills. And I guess we go through our training and we're assessed on our theory. You know, you learn those 19 propositions, and you may be asked in an assignment to evidence that you understand those 19 propositions, and you will write it down and prove that you know that information. But when it comes to skills, it can be a bit trickier, because our skills are assessed, yes, by us writing the theory of the skill, what it is, how it works in the counselling relationship, what it should do, and our understanding of that. But the nuance of a skill happens within a therapeutic relationship, and that is protected by confidentiality. So the best that we can do to be able to assess those skills is a simulated skills session with a peer. And it's just not true, really, is it? Because there's somebody sat with a clipboard, or you've got a recording device. It's somebody that you've maybe studied with for a good number of years. It is as far removed from being a real client relationship as you can get. And it can be, I guess, nerve-wracking that you're now being assessed on this, on your skills. So I better get them all in. I better get the silence in, and the reflection in, and the paraphrasing in, and the summarizing in, and pack it all in there so that I can meet that criteria. And I wonder if the skills look that way when you're out in practice.
Well, I think we all know the answer to that, Ken, and it don't. And I changed my philosophy on teaching skills. I say with the help of Ken, because how I was taught was that you just got on with it. And one of my students once said to me, well, if someone was on a plumbing course, you wouldn't say, well, get on with the plumbing, would you? You'd show them how to do it. So I used to do skills demonstrations. The only difficulty with that is, they only live as long as I'm doing it. They were never recorded. So this is what I like about your book, Ken. You've actually got, an ebook. You can click on to a link and you can hear the skill being used, and you can replay it again and again and again. I think that's brilliant. And that's something, I've got to say, that I've never, ever seen before. I've read hundreds of books on all aspects of counselling and psychotherapy, but I've never, ever seen a book that tells you about the skill and then gives you a sense of it. And I think that's brilliant, and I think that's just going to be so helpful. It's one of the things you get so often.
I appreciate that. And, I think it reflects what we're doing here in Counselling Tutor, is in that we are providing resources via technology, a lot of them new technologies. The live lectures that we do for our Counselling Study Resource members are delivered by the latest in technology, where you can kind of have video streaming even in poor internet areas. And we're taking advantage of this because it is the here and now technology, and we should be using it. Big industry and companies are using it. Why should we not use it? Learning is is changing. Learning is changing. We need to change with it. So I'm very grateful that we have the technology where even in the hard copy of the book, there is a simple URL that you can kind of just go to on your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, and you can listen to the skills. You can listen to them in a session. So the skill is demonstrated. The skill is then spoken about, what it did within that session. And then we look at the philosophical side of it, like the deeper look at that skill. So you can actually hear them in action. And that has been the feedback from the initial pre-launch of the book has been outstanding. And people have been saying that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and that will be because it's true, Ken. It is really helpful. And the other point I'd like to make is that the theory really stays at the door. How often do we sit in front of a client and go, well, that's the 7 stage of the process, or that's the irrational thought? We may allude to it, it may pass us, but actually, how much effort do we put in to think about being thoughtful in responses? Because, research has said time and time again, it's the relationship that the better quality of the relationship, the better outcome in therapy. Research again and again has come to that. Lucy Goldsmith, Manchester University, just done a PhD about a year ago on that, and it's called the dodo bird theory, and I'll be doing a little podcast on that, I think. I might have done a podcast on dodo bird theory, but it basically says that no matter what modality you're practicing, it's the relationship that is the best, gives the best outcomes. The better relationship, the more likely therapy is going to be effective. And the vital for that is the skills that you use. And
Yeah.
who learns to play a musical instrument without listening to the record? There you go.
Knowing the song in your head. You're 100% right. And through teaching skills for a number of years, I saw where the barriers were and what people struggle with. And there's great learning, as Carl Rogers rightly said, in listening to the recordings of your skills. And if there's anything you take away from listening today on this skills section, is record your skills if you are able to, even those simulated sessions at your college, at your university, at your learning institution. Take a recorder in and record your skills, because when you start listening back to them, and not listening to the material the client is bringing. Yes, that's important when you're there in the room being with them. But when you're listening back, you can listen. How did I respond to that? What skill did I use? Was that a reflection? Did I paraphrase that? Did I focus down on what was being brought? Am I demonstrating idiosyncratic empathy? Look for the skills and name them, write them down, and then see what happens directly after you have used that skill. So if a client brings a little bit of material and then you use a simple reflection, you feel worthless. That would have been their words that they would have brought. Of course, you reflect that back, and then they go, yeah, I actually do. And they go off in another direction. You can actually see the layers. You can actually see the deepening of the relationship as they get closer to those feelings. Or maybe they don't. Maybe they head off in another direction. Maybe you use a skill inappropriately and you kind of find, wow, that moment was lost there. By having that recording and being able to listen back to it, you're able to see it and you're able to learn. And Carl Rogers said through the recordings, it was the richest learning that he knew. And they would gather around the recording devices. And in those days, they were mighty big and mighty expensive. And now, for a few pounds, you can pick a recording device up on the internet and you can record those skill sessions and have them to hand. And there's great learning in that. So that I've taken my learning and what I found from my students, and I've put it into my book. It's called Basic Counselling Skills, A Student's Guide. It was available for a very short time, kind of as on a pre-launch that we sent out to our Counselling Tutor listeners, and it's coming up for main release, which will be through Amazon, and that will be in hard copy or on Kindle. And the ebook is in the ebook is available, but the audio book is in progress as well. So hopefully something that may help you, guide you. Ideal, I would say, in the UK for level 2, 3, and 4 learners.
Yeah, so it takes you from those fledgling steps when you first step into the classroom, wondering what it is, right through to that very important middle in counselling, which is counselling skills. Most people in the UK do a year of counselling skills, so that's going to be invaluable. And also the way the book's structured, I would say it will support you in level 4, and also it will support you beyond, because you can go into it and go, oh, that's interesting. There's always something to be learned. And I'm going to stick my neck out here. I think it's the first book that's ever been published in the world of counselling that links skills to direct examples. I can't think of another, Ken. I really can't at the time this goes out. So it's groundbreaking. You've broken new ground, as Rogers would say. So congratulations.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you, and I've certainly had dozens and dozens and dozens of emails on the kind of the pre-launch, and many from established counsellors who've been out there practicing for many years, saying how valuable they have found the book. And I started this off by saying, the best that we can get to be assessed in our skills sessions is that simulated skills session where we may be observed, or a recording that we have to submit. And I recognise that as being not true, but I also recognize it as being part of the process that we need to go through in our training as counsellors. So the book actually opens up with a full script of topping your session, what you need to say to be able to hit the criteria in your assignments. Remember, it's Basic Counselling Skills, a student's guide. It's there for you as a student to guide you through, and at the end of the day, to hopefully enhance and deepen your knowledge of skills, but it's also there to help you get through your assignments.
Well, fantastic, Ken. Absolutely fantastic. And of course, it's not only for students of counselling. maybe students in social work or other helping professions who would benefit from just picking that up and thinking, I use counselling skills, police officers, ambulance, paramedics, doctors. There's a whole range, a whole panoply of people, teachers who use counselling interactions, not counselling, but counselling skills. So, well worth the read and a listen, I think. And it's really good. And of course, Ken's given me a free copy. So,
well, I have to say that, Rory, I'm very grateful to you because you wrote the foreword for us. So thank you very much for that. I really do appreciate that. And if you want to get yourself a copy of that, if you don't have a copy, just go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. And when the book is live, and when it is out, it will certainly be on our homepage. You'll be able to see it there. But that kind of brings us to the end of episode 41 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, kicking off with a case study, kind of a blueprint for writing your case studies into the thick of the theory with the 19 propositions, very nicely told by Rory of how we can kind of use that, and then ending off just looking at those skills that we need as counsellors. Been a great episode.
Yeah, fantastic episode. And as you're listening to this, just think of Ken under that South African sky. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And as always, Ken, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.